talk about the 3 rules in presenting your career break on your resume. And we know a lot of you struggle with this question.
Yes. And there are really specific rules that you should adhere to. And the first one is to know when you have to account for that gap. There is a threshold.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what that is.
So the threshold is somewhere around 2 or 3 years, right? Anything more than that, you absolutely have to account for it on your resume, or it will just be kind of one of those things that requires your resume to be just ignored.
Right.
You know, it's not going to be looked at. I think COVID has really helped us here, because if you have a break between 20 and 22, no one's going to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you go before that 2018 or 19, you're going to want to account for that gap on your resume.
Right. Absolutely. Something here, though, that threshold also applies to when you maybe took a gap earlier in your resume, and then you had a job, and then so can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a really good question, and that's a little nuance. So let's say you took a break from 2005 to 2009 or 10,
right?
And then you've been working ever since.
Right. So you stayed home with your kids, and then you took a part-time job in between. Yep.
Right. If the gap is not current, if it's not the top of your resume, nobody's going to care.
Don't worry about it.
Nobody's even looking for that. Really what they're looking for is, what have you done most recently? And then they'll cull through your experience. There's a really good chance they won't even notice that there was a break in there. It's not going to matter. So really where the gap matters is if it's the most recent part of your resume.
Right. And we want to talk about experience. So number 2 is to present the gap experience as experience. Mm-hmm. Don't bury it. So that gap experience is extremely valuable time. And we discount that time because maybe you weren't paid. Maybe it was volunteer experience.
Or maybe you bartered, or maybe it was just gig work you did once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. Or to your example earlier, maybe it was a part-time job that was perhaps a little bit lower in requirements and requisite skills than you would normally take, just because it was convenient. Right. Yeah. So I think what's important to think here is that if the bulk of your gap experience is volunteer, what you don't want to do is bury it. You don't want to put it in a volunteer section at the back of your resume, because you're still going to have that empty space.
Yes.
So you want to present your experience as experience. Work is work. We say this all the time, whether it's paid or unpaid. So one way that might make you more comfortable doing this is have the heading be just experience and not professional experience or work experience. Although I would argue you could easily put work experience, but put it that way, and then present it in the same chronology, in the same way that you would present a regular job experience.
Right. So the key is don't bury it. It's valuable and it has a place on a resume with a gap. All right. And so the last rule is to provide context and scale. So explain that.
Yeah. So when you present your work experience, you're talking about your accomplishments, maybe your revenue growth, or the scale of the number of people you managed, how many people you recruited, depending on what your job was. You want to apply those same principles to your volunteer work or your unpaid work. So you want to look at the context. Where did I do it? Who is my audience? What was my role? Give yourself a more professional name. Talk about, instead of being newsletter lady, you did publishing and content creation and messaging. So really looking at the language that you use and tying it to similar language that you use to describe your professional paid work. Context also is thinking about where you did it, who you did it for, and using those names that are more professional sounding. So instead of maybe the name of your elementary school, the name of the school system sounds a little bit more professional, because some of those elementary schools have odd names.
Right.
And then looking at the scale of it. So if you were, let's say, the volunteer manager, looking at how many volunteers did you manage? How many people did you recruit?
I mean, think about some of these events that you put on in your community. You could be managing upwards of 80 to 100 volunteers. And so that really has some cachet.
You're training them, you're leading them. So using the same language to describe what you do as a volunteer that you would use if you were being paid for the same role. And let's face it, a lot of the roles that we take on, because you and I were both caregivers for a while, they are things that would be paid if someone if someone wasn't volunteering to do them.
Well, if you think about the corporate world, I mean, no one is putting, like, the town hall event at a corporation is being, that's a whole person's position, job in their job description. So
when you're looking at context and scale, you want to make sure you're presenting it in the most attractive and
Right.
compelling way. So for instance, if you're looking at money and you raised $8,000 in a PTO event, that may not be a really impressive number for most companies because they're dealing with much higher dollar value items. So what you could do is look at the growth.
Right.
Like maybe this year you raised 8,000, but last year you only raised 4,000. So you could say you grew year over year revenue or donor revenue by 100%. So look at the ways that you can present it. So it tells the best story.
We've created a resume checklist freebie for anyone who wants it. And we will put that in the comments below. So you can download that PDF. If you liked what you heard today, you can hit that subscribe button. We will bring you new weekly content, and we hope to see you in another video. Take care.